extremely Bolshevist, and so I don't go to it. I don't know why I continue supporting it. I think I'll stop.
I'm a Scientologist.
God bless you.
Oh, Hail
We
Zenu.
don't believe in God.
Great.
I'm kidding, King.
No, you're not. No, you're not.
Tom Cruise is God, obviously. That's why he's going to space in his next movie.
Yeah.
They wrote a whole book of Scientology just to include him in it because I guess they were running out of money. John Travolta's next.
Ben, you all look great. Everybody ready to go?
God bless you, sir. God bless you, sir. God bless you, sir.
I want to welcome back to the world according to Ben Stein. I'm your host, Judah Friedman. This is our second live stream episode, and we're thrilled to have you. Follow us on Parler at Ben Stein. Subscribe to the podcast on YouTube at World According to Ben Stein. Please tell your friends, your family, your significant other, or others. Please tell your acquaintances. Please tell your enemies. Joining us, as always, is the other Ben Boychuk of American Greatness, the finest managing editor from Vanguard to Big Bear. Hello, Ben.
Hello,
How's it going?
Boychuk.
Good seeing everybody.
And of course, the incomparable, and I can't even read the words you put out for me, Ben Boychuk.
Irascible.
Louis Fine. Welcome, Louis.
Welcome, Louis.
Thank you.
And we're also pleased to welcome back Remzo Martinez, Parler's Director of Outreach and Podcaster Extraordinaire. Hi, Remzo.
Hi, Remzo.
Happy Friday, everyone. It's great to be back with you.
And finally, the man of the hour, writer, actor, economist, and of course, America's humble servant, Benjamin Jeremy Stein. And we'd like to thank everybody out there that's listening to us right now from Parler on YouTube. The topic tonight was actually something Ben had picked, which was Nixon, and I wanted to bring up Trump and the comparisons. But I want to start really quickly with this because it really angers me, and I look at the crime. I look at the crimes that have been committed by our government since Nixon has left, from Iran-Contra to the wars to Benghazi to Obama spying to all these different things.
Hillary's sabotaging of her computers.
Yeah.
Her purposely stirring up the Russia hoax, intentionally making a plan to stir up the Russia hoax against Trump.
And it brings me to the obviously the Leonard Skinner song, which is Ben, about Watergate. Does your
Watergate does not bother me? Does your conscience bother you? Tell me true. Nixon didn't do anything seriously wrong. The things that he was accused of doing were either trivial or didn't happen. I mean, the main thing he did was discuss with one or two of his aides whether or not they should use the CIA to cover up Watergate. He discussed it. He said, "Should we do it?" He didn't do it, and it didn't happen. But he did raise the possibility. There's no doubt about that. I think I could raise the possibility of kidnapping, I don't know, some famous movie starlet. I don't know who they are. I don't even know who today's movie stars are. But it doesn't mean I did it.
And Ben Boychuk, what are your thoughts on that? Because it's this actually all started last night as I was driving home and I was talking to Remzo. And I just want to give people a little background. Ben and I have been driving around for a long time and hanging out for a long time. And Richard Nixon has come up. And my education, many times. And my education of Richard Nixon is from Ben Stein is very different than the education that I read in the history books or that I was taught in school. I wasn't taught in school that he saved pretty much the state of Israel, that without Richard Nixon, there might not be an Israel. And it's very sad to me. And so when I was driving home, I felt a little bad that I said to Remzo, don't ask that. But you know what the great thing about Ben Stein is, Remzo? Ask anything. And
I mean, it's one of those topics where, the one thing that I had to tell myself as I was, turning from a teenager into an actual functioning adult, so to speak, as a millennial, was trying.
God bless you. Most people don't make that a change. God bless you.
Yeah, so I mean, it was one of those moments where I really began to I had to look back at my own biases on things, especially in the world of politics and media. And to be, quite honest, Ben, my education of Richard Nixon came from three things. It came from my liberal public school teachers. I'm a victim of the public education industrial complex. It came from Futurama, where he was the villain in the show, and then it came from Hunter S. Thompson, who was one of my journalistic role models. And it wasn't until years later I started rereading, Fear and Loathing on the Campaign Trail 72. I'm looking at him like, he doesn't ever use the same objective standards he uses for other people that he does, in fact, like towards the people that he deems as political enemies. And as I began to realize, wow, I'm really only seeing Richard Nixon through a prism of a very distinct worldview, I began to realize I don't think I really know much about him. And, to my fault, I don't think I ever gave him a chance.
Well, you viewed him through the prism of the what I now call the fourth branch of government, the media, which portrayed him evilly because they hated him. They hated him from day one. I'm never sure entirely why, but they hated him the way bullies in a schoolyard hate the kid who cries, and they torture and torment the kid who cries. They don't hate the kid who hits them back. And Nixon was the one who was sensitive and who cried. Nixon was an extremely sensitive human being, and so they went after him. He also came from a modest background. His father was owned a lemon grove, and his father was a motorman or a driver or something on a streetcar. He came from a very modest background. He didn't come from the exalted gangster multimillionaire background of John F. Kennedy, or from the exalted intellectual background of Adlai Stevenson. None of your viewers will know who Adlai Stevenson was. Anyway, he came from a modest background. That makes people have contempt for him.
Stevenson's reputation as an intellectual is vastly overrated. The story goes that he died with one book on his nightstand, The Social Register.
Oh, you're kidding. Is that true?
So the legend goes.
But Ben, Lewis actually before the show brought up a good point about what you just brought up, which is he was talking about, your father, who comes from humble beginnings, and Kissinger, who came from humble beginnings, and Nixon, who came from humble beginnings. And sorry to say your question out loud, Lewis, but I thought it was just brilliant when you brought it up that there's a certain hatred for that type of person. And to go to Donald Trump, while he might be a billionaire or whatever, he's a blue collar billionaire. So it doesn't fit the mold.
Donald Trump's very much a blue collar person. His father was wealthy, not by today's standards, but by the standards of the day. But and he was from a blue collar background too. And I think people hate him in part because he's a worker, he's a builder, he's a worker, he's a man who apparently, I'm told, used to go out on the work sites and hang around with the workers, something I cannot imagine Biden or Kamala Harris ever doing.
Ben Boychuk.
So here's the parallel I want to draw between Nixon and Trump. Donald Trump ran in 2016 in part on a promise of draining the swamp.
Right.
Richard Nixon ran in 1968 in part on something that that ended up being called the New Federalism. And Nixon wanted to essentially do what Trump has been trying to do, which is to rein in the permanent bureaucracy, or at least use the permanent bureaucracy to advance his policies. So I've got a book here. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's called
No, I'm not, but I certainly like the title.
Yeah, The Plot That Failed. Well, it's an analysis of that. The author's name is Richard Nathan, and the argument is that Nixon tried to co-opt the bureaucracy for his own purposes, and then had it not been for Watergate, he might have gotten away with it, and thank God he didn't. But
it's all nonsense. And as soon as you told me the author's name, I knew what the gist of the book was going to be.
Right.
So so Nixon never even came close to co-opting the bureaucracy.
Right.
The bureaucracy is such a powerful part of government. The Washington swamp is so deep and so intractable and untreatable that even a person like Mr. Trump, who is a wizard builder and a wizard at draining difficult terrain, is not going to be able to do it. And now there is an incredible alliance among the Washington deep swamp and the deep state, same thing, and the media, which is really wicked, unelected, unaccountable. No one can hold them to account for anything, and the academics and the Congress. And now we have various minority groups, so-called minority groups, which have joined up with them to try to inject a note of racial superiority in terms of race attitude that the others don't have. I mean, we now really have a wicked coalition of people who don't like America very much and are determined to do whatever they can to bring it down.
It also, I think, it really does go to show, 50 years apart, the institutions really exist to protect themselves.
They exist to protect themselves and to make their lives better. I mean, the lives of these people in Washington who are successful people are pretty darn good. And I've seen them up close. They're very, very good. It's not like the life of a Hollywood producer. That's even better. But the lives of people in Washington are pretty damn good, and they don't want to lose it. They certainly don't want to lose it over a punk like Donald Trump as they see him. That's how they see him. I don't see him. That's how they see him.
Do you think that had Nixon been able to complete his second term, do you think he would have made more progress in reigning in the permanent bureaucracy, or was that just a non-starter?
They, when allied with the media, are just too powerful to break. And I might add, in those days, and probably in these days too, when allied with the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, are too powerful to break. And we now have a government really which was not envisioned by the founders, in which there are many parts of government that are just too big to be controlled by checks and balances. And they are really running things, and especially the part that I just talked about, the media, they're just too powerful to be controlled by anyone. Just when they're about to elect a president whom they put in there with no qualifications, a vice president that they're putting in there with terrible qualifications, and they're about to elect him. And these people, they were not themselves elected by anyone, but they are the media. I get 3 newspapers every morning, and every day, even at the Wall Street Journal, God bless them, for which I used to work for a long time, even the New York Times, for which I wrote a column for a number of years. Every story is a smear against Trump, except on the edit page of the Wall Street Journal. Otherwise, it's all smears of Donald Trump. And all the media takes its cues from the New York Times and repeats those same smears.
Louis Fine.
Well, I shared this with you, Judah, via text before we went on the air, and I want to share it, of course, with Ben and get his take on this.
Wait, Honey Bunch, can you speak up, darling?
Well, a true story. My mother, who does not know how to use a computer, even though she has a free iPad, I was her honey bunch, and my brother is her baby. I'm the older.
Oh, God bless you.
The eldest. So I shared with Judah that in the first 15 months of the Nixon presidency, there were 41,000 real or attempted bombings in the United States.
Wow. I did not know that. Man, you're a great guy. I'd love to read that. What may I ask what your source was for that, sir?
That is in the book Nixon's Shadow by Rutgers University professor David Greenberg, who is not, let me underscore this, is not a Nixon fan or supporter.
God bless you, sir. I will get that book, Nixon's Shadow. Or what? I'm sorry, say that the name of it again, sir?
Nixon's Shadow, The History of an Image.
God bless you, sir. God bless you.
So, but there is a difference here. Unlike Nixon, Donald Trump was very popular prior to becoming president because he had a hit television show.
Right, true.
For many seasons.
Very true.
But if you look at what Trump said at the Republican National Convention when he accepted the nomination in 2016, he offered a shout out in defense of LGBT rights. And Nixon as president was, as the late Ralph Toledano said, he wasn't a Goldwater Republican, he wasn't a Taft Republican, he was a Nixon Republican. He wasn't he was conservative, but he was not a conservative. And he proposed many novel, you might even say, neoliberal ideas. Why was he, in the same way Trump is, so hated when he was not a so-called movement conservative?
Because all this hatred of RN and of Trump has a psychological root. It does not have a policy root. The Democratic Party, as of 2020, we're now in October 2020, the election is very close. You could not, if you are a magician, if you are the smartest prestidigitator in the world, find anywhere in the Democratic platform any kind of economic plan, any kind of foreign relations plan, any kind of defense plan. They have no plans. The Republicans do have plans. It's not about that. It has nothing to do with that. Nixon had incredibly great plans. He had the first plan ever for fully national health coverage. I wrote the proposal and sent it to Congress. It was a long proposal, a lot of work. No Democrats had done that. Truman had talked about doing it, but didn't do it. It wasn't over policies that people disliked Nixon. They didn't like him just because he seemed too sensitive. I think it was Arthur Miller, maybe, very, very, as we all know, great. We talked about him yesterday. Great playwright. I think Nixon was considered the excessively strict but weak father. Strict but weak. And that people hated him for that. He did not seem tough enough. And Trump is tough, but on the outside, but not really tough. I mean, if you're really tough, the liberals admire him, but they don't admire him. They admire really, really tough, dangerous people like the Black Lives Matter. They admire them a lot because they might really hurt them, whereas the Republicans aren't going to hurt them.
Okay, so I want to bring up something quickly because Remzo, I've been blessed
to go
Remzo,
you've been left out. I beg
no, but I've been blessed to go to Stein University, which is the greatest university. It's the greatest traveling university in America. And I, who went to a school that was Jewish, had no idea what Richard Nixon did for the state of Israel. And I'd like Ben to talk about that a little bit. But what's amazing, another parallel, like Ben Boychuk brought up, between they have been both accused of being massive anti-Semites, President Trump and RN and Richard Nixon, and there have been no better friends to Israel than these two presidents. So Ben, I want you to tell Remzo a little bit what your father did. It's Remzo. I got to tell the story because it gives me chills.
Do it.
His father had Larry Kudlow's job, and there were a few of them.
Wow.
And Ben, let me imagine them doing it. There were a few of them every day that would knock on Richard Nixon's door, right? Sort of begging.
They didn't knock on the door. They called for an appointment. They
called and begged for him to help Israel. And Ben, I'll let you tell the story of what Richard Nixon did.
Well, during the Yom Kippur War, Mrs. Meir was prime minister, had done very, very poor planning. And when the Egyptians were across the canal, the Suez Canal, Israeli defenses were weak, neglected, pathetically inadequate. The Egyptians just poured across. Israel just assumed that, as usual, their Air Force would kill the Egyptians. But the Egyptians had these incredibly great surface air missiles that the Russians had given them. Russia is fantastically good at making missiles. And they were shooting the Israeli airplanes out of the sky like sitting ducks. And Israel was in real trouble. They were running out of airplanes very quickly. And Israel begged the U.S. for jamming devices that would stop these missiles. And the Secretary of Defense, and I'm sorry to say that I have forgotten who it was at the time.
Schlesinger.
Who was it?
Schlesinger.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. He said no. And Kissinger even said at first no. My father, who was chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors, begged Nixon to do it and said it was going to just be a terrible situation if he did it. But Nixon ordered the U.S. warehouses in Europe to be stripped of the defenses against the SAMs, the jamming devices, have them airlifted to Israel immediately, not a day later, that day. They foiled the Egyptians, stopped the Egyptians cold because now the Israeli Air Force could go into action and stop the Egyptian armor, and Syrian armor as well. And Syria had a lot of tanks. And then a couple of days later, when Israel crossed south of the canal and came up around the south and the west to encircle Cairo, the Russians said, we're going to land paratroops and land arm an army to fight and defeat the Israelis. And Nixon said, if you do, it means nuclear war. And he went to, I forget, you're going to know this, Lewis, well, it's
DEFCON 3.
DEFCON 3, which the next step is boom, boom, boom. That's the end of the world. No other president has ever done anything like that for Israel. Nothing like it. Trump has been a great friend to Israel. He moved the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, which presidents have been promising to do for decades, literally decades. And he actually did it, and was and is a real friend to Israel. All of his best friends are Jewish. His children are some of them and grandchildren are Jewish. He's accused of being a racist. He doesn't have a racist bone in his body. He's never had a racist bone in his body. Nixon was a man of his times. He was a kind of Southern California Republican country club type, although was not born rich at all. He had the kind of anti-Semitic quips that all Southern California Republicans had at that time, and some probably still do. But I would rather him call me a kike and slap me and send arms to Israel than say, oh, I love Jews, I'll never say a word, and let Israel perish. Because Israel was on the point of perishing.
Like Obama and many other presidents before. So Remzo, go ahead. Ask away.
Yeah, I mean, it's stories like this that, one, I feel as somebody that went through America's public education system, I never heard of that. When you hear about Nixon,
you're brainwashed. But you're like all Americans, you're brainwashed against Nixon. Nixon was the best friend Eretz Israel has ever had. No country has ever been better to the Jews than Mr. Nixon.
I'll take it a step further.
Somebody on YouTube said, accuse your enemies of what you're doing, and you're doing it to create confusion.
Projection.
And
I mean, I would go a step further. I mean, they weren't just anti-Nixon, especially a lot of social studies teachers of mine. I'd say that they were outright anti-American. But you know, one thing that often confuses me is that you know, they purposely leave out details like that. When we learned about Nixon in 11th and 12th grade history, it was all Watergate. It was all Watergate.
But what was Watergate? No, even now it's 2020. It's the Watergate break-in, I believe, if I have my memory serving right, and Mr. Fine will correct me if I don't, was in 72. I don't think anyone even now can tell me what happened in Watergate. Absolutely nobody says that Nixon planned or had any part in the break-in. He didn't even know about the involvement of the committee to re-elect the president for some time after these burglars were arrested. What did he do wrong after that? It's never been made clear. Bob Woodward said he did all kinds of things. My good friend, Carl Bernstein, who's been a friend all my life, said he did all kinds of terrible things. They've never been able to prove it. They've never been able to make anything stick on him. And it's just sickening how this incredibly great man who got us out of Vietnam, who brought back the prisoners of war, who saved Israel, is treated like a criminal.
Segregation in the South.
Oh, yes. Oh, thank you so much, Judah. He desegregated the last holdout Southern schools. One of my jobs at the White House was to work for a great guy, an African-American man named Robert Brown, and he was the head of minority liaison. And so I worked a lot with him on data about desegregation. And when RN took office, a very large percentage of Southern schools were still segregated by law. And when he left office, there were almost none. And nobody ever comments about that, ever.
And
I want to ask you.
So to get to Remzo for a second, if you're ever out in California, you're cordially invited to go to the Richard Nixon Museum, and it's
a great place. Except it's closed down because of COVID.
And they don't gloss over things. They're extremely honest, and it's an amazing thing. But I want to get to Lewis quickly because he actually brought up a great point about Bob Woodward. You know, this journalist. And Lewis, if you'll tell me what you're
Sure,
telling me.
sure. And Ben, this one's for you. I've got the fire going in the back and the air conditioning on full blast.
Good. God, you know my man. God bless you.
Yes, and the legal pads are all full.
Right.
So I don't know how many people know that Woodward and Bernstein used grand jury testimony that had been illegally acquired, that they were not supposed to be in possession of, that they reported on during Watergate. But more to the point, Bob Woodward wrote an entire book, Veil, just premised on his conversations with a semi-comatose CIA director, Bill Casey, whom no one saw, regarding Woodward, entering or leaving Casey's room. I did some more research and said, yes, there's documentation about phone calls, but here's a man that wrote a book asserting he had all these conversations with Casey from his deathbed, Casey's deathbed in a hospital, and yet there's no security cam footage, there's no notes, there's nothing from anyone that even saw him in the hallway. Why is this guy, other than entertainment purposes, still popular?
That's a very good question. A very, very good question. People have forgotten about that altogether. Let's ask another question. There was supposedly a source for Mr. Bernstein and Mr. Woodward called Deep Throat. And Ben Bradley, who was their editor at the Washington Post and a big Nixon hater, late in his life said he thought Ben Bradley was made up, that there never was Ben thought that Deep Throat was made up, that there was no Deep Throat. And then a guy came forward at his latter days to claim that he was Deep Throat, a guy who had been either head or temporary acting head of the FBI, said he had been Deep Throat. And but then it was revealed that he was not even in possession of most of the so-called facts that Woodward and Bernstein quoted him as saying in the book. So that was made up too. And that's a scary thing. I mean, I like Carl Bernstein very, very much. He's been a friend for a long, long time. But I think his allegations that Nixon, his and Mr. Woodward's, are very questionable. And I have said, and I'll say it again, one thing that would have happened is if Mr. Nixon had been kept in office, is that the Cambodian genocide would not have happened. Nixon would not have allowed Pol Pot and his terrorists to kill 1/3 of a nation, sometimes by having parents beaten to death by their children or having parents bury their children alive. Nixon would never have let the communists, the Pol Pot, Khmer Rouge regime take over in Cambodia. It wouldn't have happened. Ford was a great guy, but he was too weak to do it.
So
well, the Congress.
I want to get to Remzo and Ben Boychuk on this next one because the famous quote, "History is written by the winners," right? But but in the culture war, in the academia, in academia, the conservatives lost that war.
Oh yeah, we lost that war.
So what you've been being taught is history taught by the leftist winners. And it's a scary and shocking thing. And Ben Boychuk, Remzo, jump in on that. If you look back now at your professors, do you cringe at some of the lessons that you were taught?
I got to see a real good contrast in the way I went to. I went to public school here in Virginia for high school, but then I went to Liberty University, which is a very conservative college.
Great.
Yeah,
place.
I mean, I enjoyed my time there, and I graduated from the Helms School of Government. And for me, it was one of those moments where a lot of my professors, they were a bit more mixed on Nixon. I'd say more pro than against. So when I did hear pro-Nixon commentary from them, I didn't take the opportunity to ask more questions. I didn't take the opportunity to study more. I just took it as, oh, they have the wrong opinion on something. And I think it's quite strange when I look back. I've looked at the 1968 election quite a bit, and personally, I've always been a fan of Robert F. Kennedy, and I do know that despite Nixon running against JFK in 1960, they always held a really admirable and professional relationship as senators. I'm just curious if RFK had not been assassinated on the night of the California primary in 1968, and if, let's say, he had been able to get the nomination, it would have been him against Nixon. They were both very pro-environmentalist, and they were, they had similar policies to a certain degree. How do you think that would have looked having RFK go up against RN?
I think he would have been a very tough opponent to beat. He was glamorous. I think, yeah, I mean, it was terribly, terribly sad that he was assassinated and outrageous. And I think he would have been very hard to beat. But I think Nixon was so well organized by that time and had such good election machinery in place that Nixon would have won anyway. But RFK would have been a very powerful opponent. And RFK was in many ways an extremely capable man. He did not have the faults, let us say, of his, or what should I say, humanity of his brother in terms of women. I think he was not the kind of woman maniac that Kennedy was, and I think he was. I think he would have been a very, very formidable candidate.
Are you aware, Ben, of the story? I mean, it's a true story. Ehrlichman was in the hotel room in Oregon, as was Pat Buchanan. Pat Buchanan talks about it in his recent book about Nixon. When RFK announced his presidential candidacy from Capitol Hill, from the Senate, he wasn't in the Senate chamber. He was, but in the same, I guess, with statutory hall where JFK had announced his nomination, and either RN or had shut the TV after the speech, but he said very presently that some very dark forces are about to be unleashed in this country.
Wow. Well, I don't know what to say about that. I mean, Nixon did have the 1960 election stolen from him.
No, 68. I'm talking about 68 with RFK.
I know. And maybe Nixon was, and I think Nixon was predicting possibly that the Kennedys would try to steal this election from him too. I don't think he could have predicted that Sirhan was going to shoot RFK. I'm just not sure about that. I'm just not sure that. I mean, maybe Mr. Nixon was referring to the Ku Klux Klan. I don't know, because Bobby Kennedy, as we called him, or Robert Kennedy, was very much anti-segregation, whereas JFK not so much.
So before we go to Ben Boychuk, his next question, Mr. Puma asks, and everybody could take this question: if we had the technology we have today back then, would Nixon have been forced to resign?
I don't know. I think if there's Fox News in those days, he would not have been forced to resign. I mean, all the networks were totally against him, were smearing him night and day, especially that creep, Walter Cronkite, the worst dirt. And so I don't know. The networks were just smearing him all the time. Again, it's a long time now since Watergate. Long time since Mr. Nixon resigned. Nobody can point to anything he did that merited his being forced out of office. Not even close. Nothing was as bad. Not even close to Iran-Contra. And I love Reagan, so I don't take that as meaning I don't love Reagan. Nothing was even close to as bad as Benghazi, which was just outright complicity and murder. And nothing was as bad as Hillary Clinton smashing and destroying her computers. There are lots and lots of things that happened that are incomparably worse than anything Mr. Nixon did. Incomparable.
Ben Boychuk.
So you've talked a bit about the reasons for Nixon hatred. One of the things that I've noticed about people who've worked for Richard Nixon over the years during his presidency and his post-presidency is the extent of just how loyal former staffers are to him in a way that I'm
except
not
for John
sure.
Dean.
Yeah, except for John Dean. but by and large, there seems to be a loyalty to Nixon that I'm not even sure I've seen with even say people who worked for Ronald Reagan. How do you account for that?
Nixon. Well, he was a very likable guy. We were a band of brothers being attacked. So we banded together. Mm-hmm. We had happy days there. Even up to the very last days, we were a cheerful bunch and we were fighting like mad and we enjoyed it. And Nixon was very good to us. I mean, he was a very nice guy. And I can only tell you that the day he resigned, I was sobbing bitter tears. My girlfriend, Pat, was with me and we were both sobbing bitter tears. My parents were sitting really within a very long arm's length, it would have to be a very long of Nixon in the front row. And my mother was crying the most I've ever seen her cry. I've never seen her cry that much. And we loved him. We just loved him. I mean, and recently there was a Nixon reunion in Washington. I forget how many years ago it was now. And we really still all felt very strongly that Nixon was a great, great president and had been wildly mistreated by the media. And the same is true of Donald Trump. He has been a great president, and he's been wildly mistreated by the media. He has been a great president. I think, well, I was going to say history will record that he was a great president, but probably not, because history is written by the haters and the winners. So it probably won't. But as long as there are some people alive who can say the truth, there will be some little nugget somewhere for someone to find.
Ben, if you care to share, what was a day in a life like in the Nixon White House?
It was great, for one thing. I got there quite late. My girlfriend at the time, a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful woman named Pat, a wonderful woman. She has not spoken to me in many decades because she's mad at me that I remarried my first wife instead of marrying her. But anyway, she and I, we lived together in a small, very small house in Georgetown. Very, very, very small house. We would drive to the White House. I had a parking place on the ellipse. We'd walk through the ellipse, although my girlfriend was very afraid of squirrels running after her and biting her. So I'd have to walk very carefully. And then we would go in, sharp pass, we'd go in, and we would get our assignments, or we would pick up the assignments where we'd left off from the night before. This usually wasn't until about 10 a.m. Then we would work, I'd say till about 1. I would usually have lunch with my father, Herbert Stein, in the White House mess, which only cabinet members could go to. That was where I met Elvis Presley. He was sitting at the table. And
Please share that story with Remzo, because
what was Elvis like?
No, Ben. You had Ben. Set up the story.
Okay. So I was having lunch with my father, and my father, which we did very, very often. I was lucky. I don't know anyone who had a better relationship with his father than I had with mine. I'm very, very blessed in that regard. My father leaned forward and whispered to me, "If you saw Elvis Presley in person, would you recognize him?" I said, "Well, of course." And my father said, "Well, he's sitting right behind you, just a few feet from you, having lunch with Bob Holdren." I said, "Oh, that's impossible." My father said, "Well, look, turn your head around and look." I turned around, there's Elvis, without question, Elvis. And my father said, "Don't bother him." And I did it. I got up and walked over to him and said, "Mr. Presley, my name is Ben Stein. Everyone in the world is your fan, but I'm your biggest fan." And he said, "Thank you very much." Anyway, so we would work on our projects. We might have a staff meeting after lunch. One of us, a person who became very famous after Nixon days, had a girlfriend on the staff of the speechwriting group, and they would retire for a romantic time after lunch. The rest of us would be at our desks slaving away, writing whatever we were writing. There were no computers or internet then, so we had to look things up in books and statistical abstracts. I had an incredible moment about that, which I will share because I think it's a wonderful story. I worked on the first floor. My father was on the third floor. I had to find some arcane statistic about something, and I walked up the stairs to my father's office. And I said to my father, "Pop, if you're not too busy, if anything more important to do, could you help me find out this statistic?" And my father, who smoked 3 packs a day, I'm sorry to say, took a deep drag on his Kent cigarette and said, "Benji, what do you think I have to do that's more important than helping my one and only son?" And even now, I cry when I think about it. And anyway, so I would work on that. I worked on that, and then I would usually go up and visit with my girlfriend Pat. And then she was in the same building. We didn't have a place to be romantically private with each other. And then I would work. If we had a staff meeting, we got our new assignments. We'd go to the research staff and we'd talk to them about what they could find for us, and we'd start working on the project. Usually, I would have dinner at a nearby place and just go a sandwich or something and come back, work till about midnight. And then my girlfriend Pat would have gone home, picked up our dog Mary, a beautiful Weimaraner, who would come running down the hall and run into my office and greet me. And actually, because of me and because of the disturbance that the dog made by making such loud noise with her long nails, there was an edict passed out that no one could bring his dogs or maybe cats too into the White House any longer. So
You created a White House rule of no dogs.
no, well that was
Um,
then. They
that's-
probably have dogs now.
Your father had your father has the Herbert Stein law, which is
With the law,
Yeah.
if something cannot go on forever, it will stop.
and in the White House you have the Ben Stein law, which is no dogs allowed.
Right, exactly. Boy, I love that dog.
But getting to it, Remzo, do you have any more questions for Ben?
I think when it comes to Nixon, I apply this question to really everyone who's ever wanted to run for president. And I wish that this was something that was asked of Joe Biden more often. And even sometimes I wish it had been asked of Trump more often. But when it comes to just the most important question for me, it's is the person who wants to be the most powerful person in the country see the role of government in relation to the individual, the role of the government and the state and the individual person.
I think Nixon would have said that the state has far too much power. In fact, and one of our little group here brought up the new federalism. That was intended to curb the power of the federal government and give more power to the states. And in fact, Nixon had this idea, which other people have had, but he actually tried to put it into practice, of block grants in which the government, instead of saying, you have to spend your money on X, Y, and Z, would have said, here's the money, you figure out how to spend it.
And the guaranteed minimum income, the negative income tax.
Right, but he thought, well, that was, he didn't think of that by any means.
That's not the same as UBI, is it?
Great genius. I'm sorry, say again.
Is that the
Yes,
same as like
it's
universal
very,
basic
it's very,
income?
yes, it's for all intents and purposes, yes. And I happen to support that. The Democrats in Congress at the time, it was, I believe it was Moynihan's idea, or Moynihan and Nixon working together. They pushed for this, and the Democrats in Congress killed it. I don't even know if it came down, it got a vote.
I think the only time I ever heard of that was like Milton Friedman.
And by the way, I'm so glad you mentioned Moynihan. Where are people like Moynihan? There's no one.
The cemetery. That's where he is.
No one even remotely like Moynihan or like Henry Jackson. I mean, incredibly
Can
great.
I tell you something about Scoop Jackson? His son.
He was murdered by the KGB. Yeah.
No. His son was I never had a chance to meet him in person, though he was in Los Angeles briefly. His only son, and it makes me very sad, Peter, he died. He was 50 of pancreatic cancer, and his wife is a Facebook friend, and we would trade stories all the time about how Scoop was this close to being JFK's running mate, and then Nixon wanted him for Secretary of Defense, and Scoop said no because he figured he would never get along with Kissinger. And then there was serious talk that Reagan was going to pick him as Secretary of State instead of Haig. And I asked Peter, I said, what's the deal with this? He said, it's 100% true. And it broke my father's heart. And then I later learned that RN was asked about Scoop Jackson for Secretary of State, and allegedly said, well, he's too liberal.
I did not know that. I can tell you, I never heard Nixon say a bad word about Jackson, but I love Jackson so much, I can't hardly tell you. He was a wonderful, wonderful senator.
And his son was an incredible human being.
Extremely proud of his dad. He was.
And so as people are listening and people are watching, and people see what Trump is going through, how did you guys deal with this? When there was hatred? Somebody posted a picture yesterday of me of Nixon, with somebody in a protester with a Hail Hitler sign, which happens to most Republican presidents. How did you guys deal how did you deal with the hatred?
We had so much love going towards each other from within our staff, and my girlfriend was very, very, very pro-Nixon, and so it wasn't that bad. My wife, still my wife, but then she was my former wife. We got married, divorced, and remarried. She was anti-Nixon. That broke my heart. It still breaks my heart. My sister was anti-Nixon, but then my sister is pro-Biden, so there's nothing that can be said about her much. But anyway, but I love her very much. Anyway, we didn't like the hatred directed against him, but we love him. I love him. And I taught at UC Santa Cruz for a year, roughly a year, during the Nixon presidency, and they really hated Nixon at UC Santa Cruz, and that was uncomfortable. But I still had a great time there.
I have a question for Ben because I have a theory, and and only you can speak to it.
Yes.
I believe that if you prove the establishment wrong, if history vindicates you or the evidence vindicates you, the establishment will not only not forgive you, contemporaneously will attack you. Now, you mentioned Trump and the embassy, moving the U.S. embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. And that's something that presidential candidates of both parties for decades would talk about, but never did. And the supposition being, once in office, if you did that and there wasn't peace with the Palestinians, well, you'd have a huge Mideast war. Trump comes into office. He recognizes Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. He moves our embassy to Jerusalem. War doesn't happen. Now, one moment. Nixon in 48 or 50? He exposes Alger Hiss. Hiss is convicted for perjury. Years later, and the Soviet Union collapses, it's established that he was indeed a spy.
Yeah,
but starting with the Hiss case, he was never forgiven for going after Hiss, even though Hiss was convicted of a crime.
And he was a spy. And a large part in causing the Korean War.
So when I see people like James Baker or Tom Friedman or Hillary Clinton or Tom Donilon or Ben Rhodes, all the people who have said you can't do this with the embassy, and Trump did it, and war didn't ensue, and we're seeing peace treaties now signed with Bahrain and the Arab Emirates, there is no way the establishment will forgive Trump for proving them wrong in such a public way. And I want to get your thoughts.
There's a lot to that. There's a lot to that, and I think the establishment, even though there's a huge number of Jews in it, is profoundly anti-Israel, and it's to me fascinating when I meet Jews in the establishment who say, "Well, I don't really care that much about Israel," and I think to myself, "Well, what do you care about? I mean, what other issue do Jews have besides helping Israel? Because after all, Jews in America are doing extremely well by and large, although that's going to change under Biden if the horrible thing happens and he wins. But I just can't understand not caring about this.
Can you tell us also a little bit about, for people who may not be familiar, the sort of colossal figure that Alger Hiss was that Richard Nixon took down?
Yeah, Alger Hiss was a high State Department official, Harvard educated, blue collar, not blue collar, very, very blue-blooded New England family, and Nixon exposed him. Well, he was exposed actually by Whittaker Chambers, a former editor or reporter at Time magazine, as being a communist, member of the communist cell. He denied it. There was a face-to-face confrontation in Congress between Whittaker Chambers and Hiss, and Hiss absolutely positively under oath denied it. Turned out he had been a communist, and he was accused and convicted of perjury. But to give you an idea about insane the establishment is on the subject of Hiss, my wife and I watch over and over again a BBC documentary called The World at War. And who do they quote as the main expert in post-war U.S.-Soviet relations? Alger Hiss.
Wow.
Who to his dying day, he lived to, I think he outlived Nixon.
I think he did. He lived a long time. Many of these commies are tough old birds.
And insisted to his death that he was never a member of the communists. He had nothing to do with the.
Right. Well,
I think that's what everybody said. But Lewis also has a question, Ben, because you are into movies, you are into books. You've probably read a ton of Nixon books, and you've probably seen a few Nixon movies or people portraying Nixon. To the people listening, what are some of the most accurate Nixon books?
Most accurate Nixon
books, autobiography.
The best one I have read in recent years is called The Greatest Comeback by Pat Buchanan, about Nixon's comeback after he lost to Kennedy, John F. Kennedy. And that is a very fascinating insight into Nixon and the kind of person he was. Pat Buchanan is a superb writer, and he did a magnificent job on it. It's just absolutely great.
You also brought up the fact that Nixon was very sensitive. And one of my favorite stories, and Lewis brought it up to me, he didn't just do it with the Redskins. He also did it with the Miami Dolphins, Lewis.
Yeah, called Don Shula.
Where he wanted to call in plays. And I don't think people understand where he actually did call in a play to the Redskins that lost, I think, 10 yards. But I don't think people realize, there's a kid in there.
Yeah. That's great. That's absolutely great. That's great. Yeah, there's a kid, a very sensitive kid in there. Actually, the movie by Oliver Stone about Nixon, while some of it is just disgusting, I think rather accurately captures his personality. And as I say, Oliver Stone is not my favorite person, but I think he understood Nixon fairly well.
My favorite scene in that movie is when Hopkins as Nixon goes to Langley, and Sam Waterston as Dick Helm says, "Dick, it's a pleasure that you came all the way out to Virginia to see us." And Hopkins says, "My friends call me Mr. President."
That's very good. That's very good.
That also has the scene that, the bloody stake as a metaphor for Vietnam. I mean, it was, it had its.
It's not a perfect movie by any means, but I think in its description of him and the idea that there's a secret cabal of oil men and other people meeting at a ranch somewhere down a dusty road, that's obviously nonsense. But the idea of Nixon as a very sensitive, easily wounded person, I think, is quite correct. And by the way, what is the establishment? When I was a child, my father was a research director of a group called the Committee for Economic Development, which was very powerful businessmen and labor leaders who got together to talk about issues. They did it in a very reasonable way, very, very reasonable people. There's no such thing as that now. The establishment are just mad dogs in the media.
You mentioned Pat Buchanan's book a moment ago as your favorite book about Nixon.
Well, I don't know if my favorite is my favorite recent one. That's for
okay. Richard Nixon had quite the literary career after he left office. He wrote a number of very, very fine books. My personal favorite was In the Arena from, I think, from 1990. What is your favorite book that Richard Nixon wrote?
I may have made a big mistake here. I think it was called The Real Peace, and it was his foreign policy prescriptions. And boy, could we use them now? Things are going well, but the U.S. is about to be buried under a giant avalanche of self-hatred if we don't pull this election out, which I hope and pray we will. So I think Nixon would be able to explain that to the American people. I think Nixon would be able to explain to the American people that this election, it's not, everyone says it's the most consequential election of all time. It's not. Excuse me, the election of 1860 was far more consequential. But I think Nixon would be able to explain that if you're being given a choice between people who apologize for and like demonstrators and rioters and arsonists and looters and people who want law and order. And I think most Americans want law and order.
And as we're closing down, I want Remzo to hear the story about, because, I don't know if you recently saw the letters between Richard Nixon and Donald Trump, that they were corresponding for about 10 years. And
wow.
Ben, why don't you tell them the story about what happened with Richard Nixon when he couldn't find a place to live in New York?
Right. Well, this story was told me by Julie. Julie Eisenhower is just a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful young woman. I guess she's my age, so she's not that young. But anyway, she's a wonderful, wonderful woman. And during the election, she said to me, you absolutely must vote for Trump. And I'll tell you why. And she said, when my father was looking for a co-op in New York, what we would call a condo in most parts of the country, many co-op boards said, we don't want you here. we don't like you and you're too controversial. Donald Trump said, you're always welcome in any of my buildings. I'll make sure you get in and are well treated. And that was a very, very good thing for him to do.
And
That's class right there.
And it's extremely cool because one of the letters was, again, him talking to Trump about the Washington Generals, Trump's football team, and suggesting a few things. And the reverence that Trump had for Nixon is absolutely, when you read the letters, is absolutely amazing. And as we're closing up, Ben, we've spoken about the White House. I want you to, if you don't mind, please tell the story, because let me just set this up. Ben and I used to go dog walking quite often when Ben had dogs, and I can tell you that they were the greatest and most learned. The things I learned on those dog walks were amazing, and about love, about life, about spirituality. And one day I said to Ben, "How did you end up leaving the White House? What happened?
How did I end up what?
Leaving the White House?"
Well, after Nixon resigned, I was, of course, just stunned and horrified and deeply moved and upset. They had on the White House, well, I don't know how to describe it. They had a system whereby you could dial up and you could get newsreels or any kind of a video that they had. And I kept asking them to show me Nixon's farewell to the White House staff, the one I was at, and chewing gum and crying simultaneously. And they showed it, and apparently they showed it too many times. Other people tuned in and were distracted and upset, and there were complaints about that. And so I was sitting in my office one day, and Donald Rumsfeld called and said, he was chief of staff, and said, "Ben, how do you like working at the White House?" I said, "Very, very much, sir, very, very much." And he said, "Well, I think you're going to have to get a new job because we're going to have to let you go. You're upsetting people by watching that Nixon farewell so often, and also because we're just generally getting cleaning out the White House from the Nixon hands. But," he said, I will make sure we get you a nice job in the bureaucracy." And so I said, "Okay, well, I mean, you're the boss." And so I remember I called my parents. They were very well connected in Washington, and they had job offers flooding into me all over the place. They were part of the Washington swamp. They were able to help their little boy get a job, and I got it. Actually, the job I got myself, which was as a columnist at the Wall Street Journal.
And I want to give everybody a final thought. So, Louis, go for it.
Always give your best. Never get discouraged.
You're really, Louis, you're a effing smart guy.
I told Judah this story. I'm smart. To plagiarize Dennis Miller, I'm smart in the way that I know who the name of the robotic maid on the Jetsons is smart.
Very good. No, you know a lot. Always give your best, and don't let your enemies hate you. Don't hate your enemies, otherwise they win.
Only if you've been in the deepest valley.
Yes,
Remzo.
right.
Final thoughts, Remzo.
Yeah, I mean, for younger listeners or people, within and around my age, the one thing that I've gotten to learn, and one thing I love about conversations like this, is that sometimes you just need to go ahead and check your own biases and understand that there's so much to learn about the world. And just from this conversation the past hour, I've learned so many things I would have never learned elsewhere. And all it's done is convince me that I need to go out, renew my library card, and go get some books, because there's so much I don't know. And that's the beauty of life. And when we stop trying to learn, when we stop trying to, question our, what we believe and what we think we know is true, that's where we truly develop and begin to understand the world more. So no, I really
You're a wonderful young guy. God bless you for being so young and so smart. I wish there were 50 million like you.
Well,
Thank
that's
you,
what
sir.
we're trying for. And that's what he's trying for with his podcast. Ben Boychuk.
Well, last night we had a wonderful conversation about John Hughes, and immediately afterwards I went and rewatched Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. And I think after this show, I'm going to revisit my Nixon shelf, because I've been reading and studying Richard Nixon since I was in high school. And it's been a while, and this one has really rekindled my interest. And I just want to.
Can you hold that liar?
Can you see the button? Can't really see
I
it.
can
There's a
see if I
glare.
can't read it. What does it say?
It says it's from 1960. It says they
Oh.
can't lick our dick.
Oh God.
An unofficial campaign button.
God bless.
And so and it took me about 10 years to find this button, and when I finally found it, I was happy to fork over the $25 at the political
13.
memorabilia convention at the
I'll give
Nixon
you 50
Library.
for it. I'll give you 50
I want
for
the
it.
I want the counterculture posters that they had up in '68 of the supposedly pregnant woman pointing, and it said Nixon's the one.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
And I would, I'm learning from Remzo from the show, and Ben, this is a lesson we learn very often is never have contempt prior to investigation.
Yeah.
And sadly, we live in a time that there's so much contempt prior to people reading, listening, and observing. And you are the grand master of that stuff, Mr. Ben Stein.
Well, God bless you. I leave you with this thought. A few months into what may we hope not, but might be the Biden-Harris administration, we're going to be awfully sorry we were so hard on Trump.
And let's pray that that doesn't happen. And that's why we all have to. That's why every single vote has to. We all have to go vote. We all have to go vote. And on that note, I want to thank everybody for listening. You could find Ben Boychuk on Parler. How do they find you on Parler, Ben? What's your screen name?
B-Boychuk3, the number 3.
B-Boychuk3. What about you, Remzo, Mr. Parler?
Just at Remso, simple as that. REMSO.
And I'm at Judah Friedman. My account is currently locked, but hopefully
we're fixing it. We're getting it taken care of.
Hopefully the fix is in. And Ben Stein, of course, is at Ben Stein. You've crossed 10,000 followers, Ben.
God bless you, sir.
You are an extremely loved man, and we want to thank you for doing this. We will be doing this very soon. I want to thank
sooner the better.
And Ben, whenever you want, we are here. 3 a.m.
God bless you. God bless you, Lewis, for your incredible.
Thank you.
Memory.
We're going to go to the Lincoln Memorial. 4 a.m. We're going to go to the Lincoln Memorial. So
okay.
And I want to thank everybody for listening to World According to Ben Stein, everybody that was streaming. I know some people have had difficulties. So from now on, what we're going to do is if you're having issues with the link, we will give you our Zoom code so you could be an attendee. And some people are having complications. We want to allow everybody in. But all these shows will be on YouTube. And it's the World According to Ben Stein. And let me tell you something. It's one hell of a world.
God bless you, sir.
Everybody. Have a great weekend.
God bless you, sir.
And Ben, please give that famous thing you do. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you, sir. God bless you all. That was good. I love that. I love doing that. Love it.
Hold on a second.
Love doing that.
It's your calling card.